This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Apologies. We've got apology from Steve Aiken. No other apologies that I'm aware of have been received.
Also from Matthew Toole, and Matthew is delegated to Pat, and Philip, who hasn't given apologies, but is delegated to Melissa in the event of his absence, Chair. Okay,
thanks. Declaration of interests. All members are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests at each committee meeting as applicable. Have any members any relevant interest to declare? No. Okay. There's no chairperson's business. The draft minutes of the Finance Committee meeting of the 23rd of February 2022 are at page 6. Are members content that the draft minutes of the 23rd of February 2022 are an accurate record of proceeding? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. There are no matters arising. So now we're going to receive our oral briefing on nearly zero energy buildings. The committee will now receive an oral briefing from the Construction Employers Federation, CEF, on draft changes to guidance on building regulations in respect of domestic and non-domestic nearly zero energy buildings, NZEB. And I want to welcome on Starleaf David Fry and David McGee. Yes, both Davids. Can you hear me okay, gentlemen?
Yes, I can hear you. David McGee here.
Thank you, David. And David Fry, hear me okay, yeah? David Fry, can you hear me okay? Can you hear us, David? Just give us a wave if you can hear us. Yeah, we can't hear you, David. You're okay, no problem. Can you hear us now, David? No, we've got your, you've turned off your camera obviously to help the thing, but maybe you're hearing us, but we cannot hear you. Wait. Go ahead, David.
Feedback. Sorry, David Fry, if you can hear us, if you want to log off and back on again and just make sure you haven't muted yourself. And we'll sit a while.
David McGee, are you planning to speak first, or is David Fry, or what's the plan, David?
I'm here. David was going to take the lead, Chair.
Okay.
And then I'm supporting from one of the members of the CEF.
Okay, that's fine. We'll wait a wee moment if we're content.
Okay.
Hold on. I think
I'm back with you now, Chair.
Excellent.
Okay, can you hear us okay, David?
Yeah, apologies for my broadband connection. Apologies for that, Chair.
I don't have to call you David Fry and David McGee. I don't have an option, so I take no offence at that. So, yes, you're both very welcome to the Committee for Finance. Thank you for attending at short notice. And please provide members with the opening statement on changes to NZEB building regulations guidance. And I understand, David Fry, you're leading off. Is that correct? Okay, David, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee today on our response to the Department's consultation on changes to the guidance associated with Part F of the building regulations. My name is David Fry and I'm the Director of External Affairs at the CEF, and I'm joined by David McGee, Construction Director of Antrim Construction, one of Northern Ireland's largest house builders. At the outset, I want to make very clear that we, on behalf of our members, fully accept the need to significantly upgrade our building regulations with respect to the Nzeb requirement. There is an unquestionable societal, environmental and indeed economic need to do so. Additionally, and given the last significant upgrade to the regulations was in 2012, it is also clear that many house builders are already building homes in excess of the 2012 requirements on account of customer demand and technological developments within industry. However, consultation with our membership, who provide the overwhelming bulk of new build housing in Northern Ireland year on year, has led us to take the view that option 2 should be implemented as soon as practicable in 2022, with option 3 to follow some 18 to 24 months thereafter. And there are a number of reasons why we've laid out that position, Chair, which I'll just go through quickly. Okay. So the last year has seen unprecedented material shortages and price increases right across the industry, with more recent rises in energy costs now having additional negative effect. While the shortages have to some extent abated in recent months, there is no sign of a concurrent reduction or even stabilisation in prices. Those that are closest to the material supply sector of the industry consistently reaffirm that these cost pressures with the now enhanced impact of renewed inflationary pressures, will continue. This is the risk of not only making more and more of our new housing stock less affordable for purchasers, but also running the risk of making it uneconomical and unviable for housing developments to continue until the inflationary pressures ease. We are keenly aware that for a multitude of factors, we are already building nowhere near enough new build housing of all types. This is something we must remain cognizant of as we consider how new costs affect the market. With our members estimating that option 3 would cost per dwelling between 4,000 to 6,000 more than option 2 on PV alone, and this crucially being based on prices at the time of the consultation, we believe a more sustainable position is to move to option 2. Additionally, Chair, on review of many of the figures detailed in the consultation, there appears a significant disjoint between what is presented as the additional cost and what is the actual reality. Given that the Northern Ireland Executive has acknowledged for public works, which includes the new build social housing programme through PAN 0121, that many contractors need urgent assistance in order to deliver critical projects, we believe the same level of understanding should prevail where it comes to house builders being unable to take on never-ending cost increases without appreciating the challenges they are facing. Additionally, the consultation makes no reference to the proposed increases in NIE connections cost of 80% per dwelling from this July, building control fees, the likely outcome of the DFI road bond review, lead diesel changes, or the cost to house builders of inadequate wastewater treatment works capacity across Northern Ireland, something the Infrastructure Committee heard about this morning in significant detail from Drains for Development. This is unfortunate and again reinforces that the government far too often exists in silos. On that point around NIE, there is also the risk of unseen costs that house builders may have to shoulder, particularly with respect to the installation of PV and concurrent required upgrades to electricity cabling and substations. We are unclear if this has been properly bottomed out with NIE. As part of our rationale for preparing option 2 as the immediate first step, it also relates to our position around export, non-export and grid reliability. A detailed process of engagement will need to take place between house builders and NIE on each and every site to ensure that any PV that is installed can be reliably connected to the grid. Of course, we acknowledge and accept that this consultation is only the first part of a decade-long process of updating our building regulations. While this, as we have said before, is the right thing to do, it is our view that for the timeline laid out in the DFE energy strategy, there is the space to hold off on implementing option 3 until late 2020. That would give the opportunity for current inflationary pressures to ease, but also afford time for many of the other concerns we have regarding feasibility and sustainability to be addressed. It would also in no way impede the consultation on further enhancements scheduled for the coming months. Finally, we do positively acknowledge that the consultation has recognised the emerging use of heat pumps in our new build housing stock. We envisage this increasing significantly in the years to come and appreciate that the Department has sought to offset the PV requirement in line with the significant carbon reduction in running a new build home that has a heat pump installed. So, Chair, that concludes our opening remarks. Apologies again for the broadband issue at the start, and we're more than happy to answer any questions that you and members may have.
No problem. Thanks, David. I have a few questions just for members' reference, and forgot to say at the start, you've page 21, 29, 35 in your packs, which is obviously relevant to this topic. David, just for clarity, are you saying that the Construction Suppliers Federation is asking or content with option 3, but to delay it?
Yes, Chair, that's the long and the short of it. And I suppose our view is that in the current climate, with the increases of the last 12 months, as well as other pieces, I mean, we were made aware yesterday of the NIE connection cost charge going up per dwelling from July from £1,100 to £1,900. So in that context, while we're not demurring away from needing to do option 3, we're basically saying to go there in a phased approach.
And what would you say, maybe a question for David McGee, or maybe yourself, David, with respect to houses that's been built today or tomorrow, what are they meeting percentage-wise, just for the layman, or lay lady? What figure would you say those new builds are meeting today?
David, you're on mute, I think.
he's frozen.
Are you happy for me to take that, David?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The new bills at the minute, with the energy efficiency ratings that have to be done for each property, the majority of builders would be exceeding the requirement of the 2012. From our own point of view, we're probably bettering at the minute by about 6.5% on average. So we believe the standards being achieved. They're in a very high B banding within the EPC ratings.
And on to costs, the department referred to the 4 to 6. Sorry, costs they're referring to about 4,000 for PV costs. You're referring 4 to 6. There's a slight discrepancy there, but what's your opinion on that?
Again, I'm happy to take that. We have done valuations based on our method of build, and we try to deal with the fabric first, which is obviously dealing with the insulation properties of the house, trying to keep mechanical intervention to a minimum. It can, when people move into houses, it can become a difficulty for maintenance and repairs and so on. We would be estimating option 2 at this moment in time that we would be in the region of about £4,000 to £5,000 to uplift to the 25% position, and the further increase to 40%, we would expect about approximately another 5,000.
Okay, that's me for now, but there's probably something else to come into my Militia.
Just throughout your oath, very welcome, boys. Just in relation to what's happening in the Republic and now at the present time too, how do we compare with, say, here in the north of Ireland?
So, Michelle, the understanding is that we are quite a far bit behind the Republic and indeed England with regard to their regulations. We understand that we need to get on par with the Republic, with England, and as part of the DFE energy strategy, there's a pretty clear trajectory laid out over the course of the next decade. Our point, though, is it's in the context of the cost increases over the last 12 to 18 months and trying to bring this in a phased manner, particularly where the impact can no longer, in our view, be absorbed by builders. I think outside of the Greater Belfast area, where house prices are of a magnitude lower, it is increasingly difficult for development to remain viable. And it's not just the building regulations piece, it's some of the other things that we've talked about today, which make up that wider piece around the entire cost system for building new build housing.
Yeah. And just given the current sort of circumstances now as well too, are we likely to get to that stage really that where effectively people are going to be priced completely out of the market?
I think that is one of our main concerns. I mean, David may want to comment on some of the price increases on the material side of things that we've had to deal with. I mean, I think you're talking maybe over the last sort of period of 12 or so months, the price of timber alone might have increased by somewhere between 70 to 80%, depending on suppliers and different side of things on that. When you add that to the wider piece of all the costs of building new build housing, and if members took the time this morning to listen back to what was heard at the Infrastructure Committee from Drains for Development, I mean, I think one of the issues that we have is that this looks very much at building regulations in isolation. It doesn't look at the additional costs that are needed to be borne, but additionally to that, it doesn't, in our view, appear to fully bottom out the NIE networks piece. And certainly what we heard from NIE networks yesterday is that their 80% increase that is expected to come in July, albeit there might be a separate phasing done, but their 80% increase at this stage is due to come in July, does not take into account the impact of either option 2 or option 3 on connection costs for a dwelling on a site with more than 12 units.
Chair, just to come in on that with regards to material costs, can maybe just share briefly. Timber costs, these material costs are increases from January 2020. We're currently experiencing timber has increased by 90%. Concrete and precast products are around 40%. Insulation, which is one of the major factors in the uplift of these regulations, again is sitting at about 40%. And I think it's also just worth noting on the issue relating to Ireland and where we sit in relation to that. David's absolutely correct in saying that we are behind, and we absolutely acknowledge that. But there's none of the other areas have had to take so dramatic an uplift to 40%. You know, it's been staged, and we have been able to sort of understand the infrastructure that's there to be able to sustain, as David said in his opening remarks, the NIE in particular being a major player in this process.
Just one question, David, or whichever David's relevant. You see the whole PV and refer to NIE connection costs. Does it speculate that you have to export? So in other words, can you create energy for your own house, so therefore the grid connection is not relevant if you're not exporting, or is this relevant to this, that you do export? And you know where I'm coming at. So in other words, can you use what power you use or store what power you use and export, and don't export, therefore you don't have to upgrade your grid connection?
Chair, yes, there are facilities available. PV panels produce a DC current, which requires an inverter to process it into alternating current that obviously our household appliances operate on. Yes, that can be done as a direct means. Another way of dealing with it is there can be storage facilities set up in a battery form that can store and then the power can be used at different times. Obviously, we are not taking into account costs associated with the purchase of inverters or battery storage. I believe you could be looking at another £1,000 possibly to tick that box and not actually feed back into the network.
So is feeding into the network, David, apart from the £1,000 cost for battery, etc., is the feeding into the network a requirement or not for this?
Standing alone without the battery backup, it would be a requirement for the power to go back into the network. The network cabling needs to be adjusted accordingly to be able to receive that.
If you have a domestic property, say 15 kilowatt, without getting into the technicals of it, why do you need to increase your network? Because you're only putting back sometimes half what you're bringing in, you know, on a maximum demand point of view. You know where I'm coming from, David. So why do you need, and I know it's maybe an NIE question, but why do you need to upgrade your network?
It absolutely is an NIE question. What we have been told is that the cable sizes for a standard network at this moment in time are undersized and they would need to be increased. So there would be some infrastructure issues if we were feeding into the system.
Okay. I have no more questions, David, and no more other members is indicating, so I'm content at this stage, unless any other members indicate. Happy enough? Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate your answers and appreciate, and if there's no doubt any more queries, we can make contact if that needs to be the case. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, are there any further actions members wish to take forward at this time? And do the committee want to hear from the NIB, RAC and the department next week on this issue? Happy enough, or we can...
Chair, there is a discrepancy, isn't there, in the costing? 4.5 or up to £6,000 under the additional So I'm not sure that I fully understood there exactly. You know, there's still a lot of technical issues and all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Is the department due in next week?
right, so yeah, I've thought that that would be where members are with this, so I'd ask the department and NIBRAC, who are the advisory committee that advise the department on these things, to come next week. So members should come next week armed with their questions. And they will hopefully put you right on that.
So am I right in saying we can understand what the department want to do? They want to insulate homes better, they want to less zero, we appreciate all that, but it's the jump, is the shock to the industry, in simple terms. Alicia?
I don't think that there's clarity in the answer to your question. And that if a person is, we'll say, if they had, I know they have the technology, but it's not that sophisticated at the minute in terms of storage. Yeah, in terms of storage and its work, it's continuing. But if you were at that stage that whereby that what you don't consume, you can store, as opposed to exporting back to the grid.
Is that a question, Alicia, sorry for cutting across, is that a question of NIE? Do we get, without going into a whole 2-hour session with NIE, but is that a question to understand that?
Okay.
Yeah.
NIE Networks were in contact with me yesterday, so they're going to be writing to us, but I will contact them and ask for, we're looking for clarity, for an explanation on what's the network problem.
I don't think we got it there.
It's to understand that whole exporting to the grid question. Do we need to do it? And is this regulation asking us to do it?
I think the idea of doing it is that NIE pay you.
Yes.
So that's it. So if you couldn't export to the grid, then the financial doability of this is reduced. So the economics of it don't really work just as well. So you want to be able to export back to the grid.
I don't understand the physics. If you're importing X kilowatt,
yes,
why can you not export a kilowatt?
Yep, good question. Don't know the answer. I'll ask NIE. Yeah, okay, no problem.
So committee's agreed then. Clerk's on the right to NIE to see if we can get them, and the department's due and NIB RAC next week anyway. Yep. Okay, happy enough, members, we'll move on, yeah. Okay, we're now going to move on to SL1, apologies, SL1 month's rates holiday. The Department of Finance proposes to make the rates Coronavirus Emergency Relief Regulations Northern Ireland 2022. The rule provides for a 1-month business rates holiday at 100% for April 2022, applied to all businesses, with the exception of utilities and large food stores. The eligibility criteria enabled by the rule will match that which applied for the 4-month general rates holiday at the start of the pandemic. The order will come into operation at the end of this financial year and is subject to negative resolution procedures. Members, any views?
Chairman, has the exclusions include off-licence takeaways?
No, it does not.
It's an absolute fortune during the...
Indeed, but no, it does not. It is utilities and larger food stores, so it's everybody but them.
I mean, the great unheard secret here is that off-licence has made an absolute killing during the pandemic, and have kept their heads down, never complained about any restrictions. The queues outside the door said it all. The stats on the amount of alcohol bought from off-licence is there, and it's staggering, because remember, during the coronavirus pandemic, hotels, clubs, restaurants and bars were closed. So therefore, people who wanted to indulge in intoxicating liquor, the only option they had was to go to the off-licence. So I don't see why they should be getting any form of refund. In fact, there could be a strong case for an increase in the rates. Secondly, the only source of food during that period was hot food takeaways, and I am not aware of any of them complaining either. So I would be far happier, for instance, that hotels who bore a huge burden and clubs got extra, rather than people who frankly found coronavirus to be the best thing for their business for years.
Well, maybe the next SL1 will clarify the hotel bit, because it's going to get the additional, you may be aware of that anyway.
What I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, is that if we exclude off licences and hot food takeaways, we may have more money available for those who were genuinely hurt by the pandemic.
Any other views, members? No. Just on one question, maybe Peter, you're aware of this or not. See the larger food stores, I presume that'll be a square meterage or square foot. Someone above, there's going to be a line in the sand there.
You remember the last time Tesco's and Asda and the like, they actually paid the money back, as I recall, so they're just being excluded this time, so I think it's based on that. Sorry.
Yeah. But it was only some of them paid it back.
Well, this time they're all, there's the wider exclusions. I think the department may have learned from that, but also members, if they were to change the rule as suggested by Mr. Wells, it would need the executive to do it, and we have no executive.
Sure. I mean, we're all aware there's a lot of fear out there, especially in those small businesses, find themselves coming out of it, and anything that helps them in order to try and hold on, because at the minute they're not paying. There is no rate there at the moment for them to pay, but we know from our offices those that are asking us when that's coming in, and I do agree with what Jim said. It makes a valid point that there are some that has, but the majority, I can tell you, from the public health sector are finding themselves on their knees, and even these sweetie shops on the streets corner. So we need to be careful and give as much support as we can, because if you lose these now, I can't see them coming back.
But ultimately, we have a decision to make. We support this SL as it sits, or we don't as it sits. We can't appreciate Jim's point.
Can't amend it.
No.
So,
See, it's an anti-drink thing, because I know the bars suffered very badly, but off licences, I know in my own constituency, the queues outside the off licences were phenomenal, and the markup was also phenomenal. So it does seem unjust, but then if we can't amend it, then we lose the benefit to other deserving causes. But I think we should write to the department and point out that not all businesses suffered equally.
Well, is that a proposal then? We write it.
Right to them and just point out that they're producing future legislation that it needs to be less blunt approach.
Are we content with that approach to write to them, or
We're still sort of accepting the...
Yeah, well, we're going to come on to that now, but
Yeah.
okay. So we're content to write to the department anyway. But if members are content, is the committee content with the policy intention of the proposed rule, and is therefore content for the department to make the rule? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. We'll move on, members. The next one, SL1, the 2-month rates holiday. So in a similar vein, the department proposes to make the rates coronavirus emergency relief number 2 regulation in Northern Ireland 2022. These regulations provide for a further 2-month business rates holiday at 100% for May and June 2022 in respect of retail, tourism, hospitality, leisure, childcare, newspapers and airports businesses. The relief will supplement the 1-month general rates holiday, as we just agreed, also apply to these sectors. At the start of 2022-23 reading year, as a result of the previous SL1, the rule would come into operation at the end of this financial year and is subject to negative resolution procedure. Members, any view?
Approve.
Okay. So if members are content, is the committee content with the policy intention of the proposed rule, and is therefore content for the department to make the rule? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. So move on to item 9. SL1, back in business. The department proposes to make the rates temporary rebate amendment order in Northern Ireland 2022 under powers conferred by Article 31D, 15 and 16 of the Rates Northern Ireland Order 1977. The proposed rule will allow any new business which occupies a long-term vacant property valued as a retail unit to pay rates at the vacant rating level, which is 50% for a 2-year period. This is to reinstate the back in business scheme which expired in 2017, and in the absence of an executive. The department is to undertake an economic appraisal of the scheme in 2022-23. The cost is given as $500,000 in rates foregone. The rule is subject to affirmative resolution procedure and is to come into effect immediately and for the duration of 22-23. A plenary date on the 14th of March is expected. Members, any...
A welcome initiative just to encourage new businesses to set up where probably previously businesses were located, and that as there's an incentive, and hopefully it'll give benefit to a lot of people that we respect. So
just a query on that, just a question maybe, Peter. You refer to the definition of a new business. I presume that means a brand new business. It's say a business at a Oma and they move to Strabane with another, that's not a new business? You know, like a second shop or a second...
Said something about this.
I didn't see it, but I just took a wee note because...
It's a new business. Now, I could simply write to the department and ask them to define a new business, so I think the committee is still supportive of the rule, but they want to know. Yeah, okay.
No,
problem.
No, it's just a query.
No, it's a good
what's the definition of... So, if members are content, with the policy intention of the proposed rule and is therefore content for the Department to make the rule. Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Item 10 on your paper, SL1 ATMs. The Department proposes to make the rates exemption for automatic tallying machines in rural areas, Order Northern Ireland 2022, under Article 42(1)(g) of the Rates Northern Ireland Order 1977. The rule is subject to affirmative resolution procedure. The proposed rule will continue the rates exemption for around 50 ATMs in designated rural areas. When this rule was passed last year, the rates exemption applied to 100 ATMs. The following department official will explain the background. And I want to welcome on Starleaf Sharon McGee. Are you there, Sharon?
I am.
Can you hear me okay? You can?
I can hear you fine and I can see you guys, but...
We can't see you, but
We'll
we'll motor on. There's no issue with that.
Okay.
Sharon,
I
what?
think I'm in your meeting room, but
Okay. Sharon, welcome back to the committee. Can you please tell us what has happened in respect of the rates exemption for ATMs? And can you explain the change to valuation case law which applies, please?
okay. So 2 years ago, there was a Supreme Court decision called Cardtronics, and the decision in that was that ATMs that are attached to, or what we call contiguous to, a supermarket or filling station or convenience store, that they wouldn't be valued separately for rates in the valuation list. Now, that was a long-running legal battle, and we were waiting for that Supreme Court decision before we took any action on what to do with the ATMs in our non-domestic valuation list. So as a result of that decision, LPS Valuation set about reviewing all the ATMs in the list. It started off, there was over 470 ATMs, and to date 211 have been removed from the valuation list and are now valued just as part of the supermarket that they're attached to. So if you can imagine, you're going to Sainsbury's and there's a Sainsbury's Bank ATM at the supermarket, that ATM now doesn't have a separate rateable valuation. So that's what LPS Valuation has been doing. They've been applying that case, that Cardtronics Supreme Court decision, to all the ATMs in Northern Ireland. Now, there are still 266 ATMs in the valuation list and they're still under review. So we're not finished entirely here. But the ones that you're concerned about, the ones that are part of this rural ATM exemption legislation, a couple of years back there would have been over 80 in that category. This time last year, we had already removed 34, so we were down to 80. We were down to 50. So whenever the Minister was on his feet in the debate in the Assembly talking about this legislation, that was June 21, and at that time there were only 50 left in the valuation list. And at the moment, as of today, there are 47. And as I say, that's ongoing. So does that answer your question, or
So Sharon,
is there anything else?
I know it says 50, so we'll call it 47. So we're agreeing, correct me if I'm wrong, that the 47 ATMs are not rateable and they're external to the business.
Yeah, so at the moment, they're still in the valuation list. They're still rateable properties. But what we're saying is because they're in rural wards, that they should be exempt from rates. And that's a long-running policy that we just renew year on year to provide a banking service in rural areas. That 47, actually, I just got a message from a colleague there. It's actually down to 43 today. So as I say, the LPS valuers are still working at interrogating the list to see if they are still rateable paradidiments, as we call them. So you would have seen more within that category in the past couple of years, but what we're doing now is whittling that number down to the ones that are only valid rateable entries.
So if one of the, and I'll open it up to the floor, if one of those ATMs is external, one of those 43, Sharon, to the premises, what's the difference if it's internal? So if there's an ATM inside a shop, we'll call it in Balik, what's the difference?
So generally the ATMs that are in the hole in the wall at a shop, filling station or supermarket, those are the ones that are covered by that Supreme Court decision. Those are the ones that won't be valued separately. The freestanding ones in a high street where it's just a hole in the wall but it's not associated with another retailer or it's not attached to a bank, those are still rateable. And if they are in a rural ward, then they will be exempt. So they won't actually pay any rates, but they'll still be in the list. So you'll still have ATMs in the valuation list that aren't attached to the host being the supermarket, the convenience store. Those are still rateable.
Jim?
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Jim?
I'm intrigued here because just to give you an example to be parochial, Refryland in South Down in the last 5 years has lost all of its banks. Now, that could be classified maybe as an urban situation, but the hole in the walls are now an essential service in the absence of banks. And sadly, the trend in South Down, I'm sure everywhere else is, I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years' time I'd have lost every bank branch in South Down because the trend is inexorable. What do you define as a rural ATM?
The rural wards have been defined by us, by the planners, through the planning legislation. That's not a valuation decision. So all of the wards in Northern Ireland are either classes or urban or rural. So we're using that list. It's quite a long list. It covers quite a large area. I can get you that list of rural wards if you like. You can go through it and see if there's anything there that causes you any concern. But it's a very well curated list. And as I say, we get that from the planning service.
I would see ATMs in the situation of a town with no banks at all. It's not a commercial activity, but an essential service. And when we did fight, for instance, in Crossgar to save the bank, which went, one of the battles was, well, at least if there's an ATM and a post office, that most people have access to a reasonable amount of banking services. But if there's anything which will inhibit ATMs remaining in that type of situation, then that takes an essential service in the community. And I'm just wondering, if we agree this, will we find that in what we would perceive to be a town but no bank, something will inhibit the provision of ATMs?
Well, if the town that you're talking about is in what's designated a rural ward, then that ATM will be exempt. They won't pay any rates anyway, so they'll never face that liability. Yeah,
it depends what you perceive as rural. Refryland is a town, quite a big town, but it's in the middle of a bank-free, huge bank-free area. And when I write to local branches of the Ulster, Danske or whatever, asking them to give me an assurance that they're not going to close, they will never do that. And if you look at some of the states of the banks in rural towns, it's quite obvious that they're being run down because not a penny is being spent on them. So we can't do anything which will deter the banks having ATMs in non-rural towns, if you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, I get it, but I think, and I hope I don't stand corrected here, but I think Rathfryland is included in the list of rural wards.
Members,
so your ATM there should be. I mean, I can check this easily enough for you if you want me to get back to you on that.
Excuse me for being broken. What about Kilkeel?
It's on page 292 of our pack, Jane.
Yes, it is. Page 292. Rathfryland's definitely on it.
It's Kilkeel. I hate to be broken, but I'm sure Castleberg or someone's going to get a mention of it as well.
Castleberg is on it.
Hold on, I'm just going to have to look it up.
That's a town of 5,500 people.
No matches were found. What council area would that be in? Is that
Newmorn Down?
Newmorn Down, sorry, that's why I can't find it.
On along Ballyduggan, Ballyward, Camelot, Castlewellan, Crossgar and Killylea, Crossmidlane, Derryboy, Drummondess, Dundrum.
No, it's not.
No, Kilkeel's not there.
Can I explain the situation in Kilkeel? We've lost two of our banks, lost Bank of Ireland and Allied Irish. We're left with one, which is Danske. Obviously, we all hope to stay, but if the situation were anything to go by, you never know. So if Danske, unfortunately, were left Kilkeel, you're saying that there would be rates paid on any ATM left behind? Is that my interpretation of? Can you still hear something?
I wasn't sure what the question was there. Just run that by me again.
Well, the situation in Kilkeel is we've lost 2 out of our 3 banks recently. Allied Irish closed just before Christmas. Now, if the trend for Refryland's thing to go by, we could end up with no banks. Now, does that mean, as it's not a non-rural ward, does that mean that there will be rates paid and any ATM left behind?
Well, I can't say what any decision the banks will make. Well, I mean, I wouldn't have any clue on that, but all I can tell you is if it's in a rural ward, they will not be charged rates, which might be a good incentive for them to stay. It really reduces their overhead to keep the ATM there. They're not going to be charged anything.
Kilkeel is not a rural ward.
Kilkeel isn't?
But we can't find
I don't have the list in front of me.
So I suppose ultimately, Sharon, if a Kilkeel or wherever, it's large enough but it's not on the rural list, ultimately, and it doesn't have bank provision, and it's got an external ATM or an ATM, those businesses are going to be charged to provide that ultimate, call it banking service.
If it's a freestanding ATM, that's not connected to the host retailer or the filling station or the convenience store. If it's one of those ones you would see standing alone on a high street with no connection to anything else around it, then it would be rateable.
What we try to do when we're negotiating with the banks is that if they're going to close, at least they leave the ATM in the wall of their former premises. Why would they do that if they're paying rates on it? Because it's not profitable, it's a service to the community. And I mean, Kilkeel is 14 miles from the nearest bank no matter what way you go. So therefore, are we regarding this as an essential local service, which should not be rated at all, or regarding it as a profitable exercise, which it isn't, and asking the banks to pay rates on it?
Well, they've always been rateable if they're attached to the bank. If the bank decides to shut and leave the ATM where it is, the ATM will remain rateable. I mean, the alternative to what we're proposing today is that we don't bring in this piece of legislation and they all lose their exemption and they all remain rateable. I don't know what other way of dealing with this. We certainly can't foresee what a bank is going to do in any location. We can only try to get this through to protect the ones that are in those rural wards.
Yes, but what you could do is extend your concept of rural to isolated towns where you're miles and miles. You'd have to go to Newry or Newcastle or Castlewellan to get an ATM in that situation if Kilkeel lost its ATM. I use it all the time, so there's a wee bit of self-interest here as well. But, what's different now is the massive closure of branches in rural towns. There's not a month goes by you don't see more than being lost. And that is having a real impact on businesses and footfall in town centres. So how do you go about getting bigger towns designated as rural?
Well, all I can tell you at the moment is the definition of rural it comes from the department by Nzeb. It's been long-standing for this scheme, very long-standing, and to try to change it now, we would need an executive because we've been amending something that's been in place for a very long time. So it's not within my power at the moment to bring in a change to rural wards or even within my power to suggest such a thing. I can't do anything about that today, but if you want me to bring it forward for the next executive, certainly something we could look at again.
Well, it's maybe communication we can agree at the end if we write to the Minister just to seek clarity on that. I'm not disagreeing with your answers, Sharon, to be fair. Pat?
Hello, Sharon. Thanks very much. I do welcome it. I was just curious, as you've done your research, there's a lot of those ATMs now that I find are charging people in order to use them. So if they're making that charge and there's a profitability coming out of that ATM and they're not paying rates, have you looked at that?
Well, again, Pat, the bank's charging policies are really out of our hands here. Yeah. We don't have any say over that. All we can really do is try to avoid the exemption where it's most needed.
I know, but that's not really what I'm trying. That's not really the question. My question is, most of the banks are free. I mean, if I use my own bank, it's free. But I know there are some of those ATMs out there that are run by commercial enterprises. So are you aware of those when you put them in, or it's not part of your criteria when you look at them? No? I'm just asking.
No, I'm aware of the charges of being a user myself, but no, it wasn't something that we took into account here. We were simply looking at where are the worst affected wards, that was the rural ones, and can we extend the exemption to try to secure those ATMs in those locations?
Most of the
That's
large
all.
banks.
That's all we're trying to do here.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks, John.
Okay, Philip.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, I want to welcome the extension of this rates relief because it is certainly very beneficial to ensuring that we have ATMs in rural areas, and I suppose I'm declaring an interest. Quite a few of them are in my own constituency, so I definitely welcome that. And we in rural communities have had long battles in some cases to get ATMs into your constituencies to ensure that constituents don't have to drive long distances to get access to the money because banks are closing down. I thought I understood the concept, but as more questions were asked, the more confusion I felt within myself, Sharon. So, I mean, you seem to be saying because of this court judgment, or I'm thinking that what you said, the court judgment, you used the example of Sainsbury's. So previously a Sainsbury's ATM attached to a big Sainsbury's supermarket would have been rated separately to the supermarket, but now it's only the supermarket. So by and large, it's that ATM is paying no rates, if I understand what you're saying. And this rates exemption deals with rates or ATMs in rural sections. So, I mean, first of all, can you, is my understanding of what you said in the Sainsbury example correct? And then just clarify, I know you've done this, just what ATMs are still paying rates? Okay,
you are right in your interpretation. So the ATM that is attached to the big supermarket, what we call the host retailer, the ATM and the host are both getting the economic benefit from the shop and the ATM being attached together. So the Supreme Court decision was that the ATM is therefore not a rateable hereditament or a rateable property in its own right and should be subsumed into the rateable value for the host retailer. So the big shop, the filling station with the hole in the wall, the convenience store with the hole in the wall. So all of those ATMs that have been removed from the list are now actually on the survey, on the plan that the valuers hold. The ATM is now part of the shop. You won't find a separate rateable entry for any of those anymore, and they're still working through the 266 remaining. Okay, so you're quite right in your interpretation. What was your second question? It's
kind of maybe following on from that. So if I'm correct in that, so like say a spar shop or a petrol station that has an ATM that's not, like in the Sainsbury's example, it was a Sainsbury's shop and maybe a Sainsbury's ATM, but maybe a petrol station in a town that has, any number of different ATM type providers. Are they paying rates on the ATM machine?
The separate freestanding ATM machine, which has its own wee house on a high street, is still rateable. The one that's just sitting by itself, that's operated by any of the banks or by Cardtronics, that's not attached to the host retailer, it has its own separate footprint, they're rateable. They stay in the list.
Okay, and I may be splitting hairs here. I'm not sure, like if you were driving along, say, at the Apple Greens, for example, so if they have an ATM on the outside of their building, is that deemed a freestanding ATM?
That's okay.
If it's on the outside, the hole in the wall is on the outside, but it's within the curtilage of that shop, and that's the legal rateable definition for it, the curtilage, then they are included in the shop. Okay. So it's only these ones. There might be in a pod separate from a building. I'm thinking of, say, if you were on Royal Avenue in Belfast, there's like a kiosk outside what used to be Tesco, and there was a couple of ATMs in it. That's a freestanding pod of ATMs. That's rateable.
Okay.
And that same pod, if that was relocated to a rural ward, they would be exempt because of the location in a rural designation.
Okay.
So to stay on the list, but to be.
Okay, Sharon, thanks for explaining that to me.
Okay, thanks,
No
Philip. Gemma?
No, sorry, thank you. My questions have been answered.
Okay, super. Okay, members, no other comments on that? Any other queries? So, Sharon, thank you. I think we'll be picking you up very shortly again.
Yep.
Unless it's a different Sharon
Yes,
McGee.
I think so.
So we'll see you in a few.
No, it's me.
We'll hear from you in a few moments again. Okay.
Okay.
So, Chair, that being the case, is it the case the committee wants to write to the Minister, indicate that it's alarmed by the loss of ATMs in rural areas and the process of revaluation, which I wasn't aware of before today, and to indicate to suggest that there be a policy change in the future to address it, but for the meantime support the SL1 because it continues the exemption for those 43 ATMs.
So I just have a sort of a question.
Sorry, Chair.
No, just of yourself. You talked about 43 or 47, there's a few different numbers bounced about. So presume that number will rise, and can it rise automatically based on the fact we are agreeing till an SL1 for 50?
No, it's what the SL1 applies to is rural ATMs, which are standalone.
So the number's not relevant?
Yeah, that would be my understanding. It just happened to be, I thought it was 50.
That's
Turns
right.
out it's 43. So it could be really, I suppose, any number. But it has to be in those wards that have been mentioned. It has to be standalone in order to get the exemption.
I would propose, if it's agreeable to the committee, to get a one-pager to explain that in simplistic detail, because I'm a little bit confused about outside a filling station, in a filling station, rural, non-rural, so that, you know, if Militia look at it as you can understand clearly. I'm sure you do understand, but it does get a wee bit complex.
Yeah.
If you're agreeable.
Is that agreed, Chair? Committee?
Are we happy enough for that approach, yeah? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll ask the department to provide that and write to the Minister in those terms.
Yes, I'm happy enough for that. So, back to the SL1 that I suppose we're discussing. Is the committee content with the policy intention of the proposed rule, and is it therefore content for the department to make the rule? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, members, moving on to item 11. SL1 rates relief. The committee will now receive an oral briefing from the Land and Property Services officials on SL1, the rates relief qualifying age amendment regulations Northern Ireland 2022. The rule would come into operation by the 1st of April 2022 and is subject to negative resolution procedure. I want to welcome in Starleaf Sharon, you're very welcome again back, and which Sharon McGee, Director of Rating Policy LPS, and Teresa Murray, Rating Policy Division LPS. Members, draw your attention to the clerk's brief at page 300 and the SL1 at page 301. Sharon and Teresa, you're welcome again to the Committee for Finance. Please provide members with your opening remarks on SL1, the Rates Relief Qualifying Age Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022, please. I hope you can.
Hello again.
Hope you can hear me okay after
Didn't go very far.
Hello.
Okay, hear me okay, Teresa? Yes.
Yes, can hear you, yes.
Thanks. So Sharon or Teresa, whichever one of you wants to lead off, go ahead.
Okay, I'll start and I'll kick it over to Teresa if you have any type of questions. So thank you again for this opportunity. So today now this is about the Rate Relief Qualifying Age Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022. Okay. So Teresa drafted the amendment to the regulations. That's why she's here with me today. She was also one that spotted that this needed to be done. So first of all, just to assure members, there's no change to any policy in this amendment. This is about realigning two pieces of legislation. It's only needed because we have to amend a cross-reference from the rate relief regulations to a subparagraph that was added to the housing benefit regulations. So to take you back a wee bit, the housing benefit regulations brought in a subparagraph because they had to differentiate between claimants born before 1st of April 21 and those born on or after 1st of April 21. And that necessitated the addition of a new subparagraph in the housing benefit regs, okay? That new subparagraph is not currently cross-referenced in the rate relief qualifying age regs, and it needs to be. So the only reason for this change to be made to the rate relief regs is because of the new subparagraph in the housing benefit regs, and it wasn't covered by a cross-reference in the rate relief regs. But if we bring in this amendment, it will realign those two statutory rules, and it will ensure that all the couples can continue to benefit from a 10% enhancement to which they would be due. If we don't bring in the regulations, then that's in jeopardy. So that's what this is all about. It's about aligning two regulations where there was a mismatch because of a paragraph that was added to the housing benefit regs a while ago.
Okay. Do you want to say anything, Teresa, or does Sharon cover that? Are you happy enough?
No, happy enough for that, yeah.
Okay. Members, any questions? No. Teresa and Sharon, thank you. If no questions, we're content. Or they seem content anyway. It's hard to tell sometimes, but they look content. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate coming along. Thanks, Teresa, and all the best, Sharon. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, members, any views? Are you content? We'll go through the formality, yeah? Okay. Is the committee content with the policy intention of the proposed rule and is therefore content for the department to make a rule? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on, members, to item 12, SR Energy Performance Certificate. The department has made a draft statutory rule, the Energy Performance of Buildings, Certificates and Inspections Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022. The rule amends the Energy Performance of Buildings, Certificates and Inspection Regulations Northern Ireland 2008. The purpose of the SR is to reduce the statutory fees that are charged when data is registered for domestic and non-domestic from £1.89 to £1.70. That's energy performance certificates. Display energy certificates and air conditioning inspection reports from £1.64 to £1.50 for domestic certs and from £1.89 to £1.70 for non-domestic certs. The committee considered the proposed rule on the 26th of January 2022 and had no objections to the policy intent. The department advises that the draft rule doesn't deviate from the original proposal. The SR is subject to draft affirmative resolution procedure. It is proposed that the changes will be made on the 1st of April 2022. Members, have you any views? No views? Happy enough?
Happy enough.
Okay. Members, the committee has considered draft SR, the Energy Performance of Buildings, Certificates and Inspections Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022, and, subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, recommends that it is affirmed by the Assembly. Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Members, we're going to move on to item 13, written briefing, the CLG report on strengthening committee scrutiny. The committee will now consider the Chairperson's Liaison Group CLG in brackets report on strengthening committee scrutiny at page 313 of your packs. The report followed the findings of the RHA inquiry and includes a number of recommendations from page 358. Recommendations 1 to 9 deal with subordinate legislation. Recommendations 10 to 13 deal with pre-legislative scrutiny at page 360. Recommendations 14 to 20 deal with the passage of primary legislation. Recommendations 21 to 23 deal with post-legislative scrutiny at page 362. Recommendations 24 to 26 deal with staffing at page 363. Recommendations 27 to 31 deal with engagement. And recommendations 31 to 33 deal with the role of the Examiner of Statutory Rules at page 365. Members, have you any views? And whenever you're maybe just thinking on that, if we have an issue, ultimately, what way does that work?
We'll go right back to the CLG as they'll be considering the report shortly. So if
sort of today, isn't it?
I don't know if they've actually met today, have they? Did they meet?
No, they talked about getting a response by...
They did, but I don't think we were able to actually do that. I don't think CLG was, it was supposed to meet yesterday and I don't think it did, so there's probably a bit more time. So there's an awful lot in there, members, and you have lots of other things on your mind. So I guess if anything occurs, if Chair, the members are content to contact the clerk and I can feed that back on your behalf if you like.
Yeah. And I presume an individual MLA can feedback also?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Still that opportunity. So, is there any feedback which member wish to make to CLG at this time? Are there any other related actions? So if you have no feedback from the committee, members can do it, I presume, on their own bat, if you wish.
Go on then.
Okay. Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay.
Lovely.
Okay, members. Correspondence. Item 14.1, correspondence. Members are asked to note the index of the 6th received item of correspondence at page 491. So SAB secondments. The committee is asked to note at page 493 ministerial correspondence providing information on Strategic Investment Board secondments to the department and related costs. Is the committee content to note this correspondence pending the oral brief from SAB later in March? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Omicron support measures. The committee is asked to note at page 496 a departmental response to committee queries regarding Omicron support measures, advising there are no non-Northern Ireland Tourist Board certified hotels. The Department indicates that it is for the Department for Economy to bring forward a case for supporting B&Bs and guest houses, etc. Is the committee content to note this correspondence?
Noted.
Is this agreed? Okay.
Great.
Thank you, members. Item 14.4, Casement Park and Sub-Regional Stadia. The committee is asked to note at page 499 ministerial correspondence stating that Casement Park and the Sub-Regional Stadia are executive flagship projects which will be the recipient of ring-fence funding. Further information is not provided on Casement Park as this is subject of a judicial review. Is the committee content to note this correspondence?
Noted.
This is agreed, yeah? Okay. Item 14.5, non-domestic RHI scheme. The committee is asked to note at page 502 a response from the Department for Economy stating that a policy decision on the closure or otherwise of the non-domestic RHI scheme requires executive approval. Is the committee content to note this correspondence? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. 14.6, unique circumstances funding. The committee is asked to note at page 504 a response from the Secretary of State which reiterates a previous NIO statement regarding unique circumstances funding. Is the committee content to note this correspondence? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. 14.7, levelling up money. The committee is asked to also note at page 508 a copy of ministerial response to the Committee for Economy confirming no new levelling up money for Northern Ireland and indicating limited progress in respect of free ports. Is the committee content to note this correspondence? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Moving on, members, to 14.8, composite information request. Members are asked to consider the composite request at page 537. Is the committee content that the composite request is an accurate and complete record of the committee's information request? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
And forward work item 15. A draft forward work programme is at page 554. Next week's meeting is quite heavy going. LPS will brief on Reval 2023 and on rates debt management. We will also hear from NIBRAC about the Nzeb guidance. There are also quite a few statutory rules. Is the committee content with the forward work programme as drafted? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Any other business, members? Nobody any other business? No. And date, time and place of next meeting. The next meeting of the Committee of Finance will be on Wednesday the 9th of March 2022 at 2 p.m. here in the Senate Chamber and on Starleaf. Thank you very much, members.
Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Senate Chamber, programme signed.